Tonight we are studying the two Torah portions of Tazria and Metzora, and we are going to be learning the holy words of Rabbi Leib Heyman. And Rabbi Leib Heyman is going to address, I think, a very, very important question, one that Rav Aryeh says, Rav Leib says that many commentaries ask, and he gives an extraordinary answer to really teach us something very new about the concept. The concept that we're going to be talking about in this week's Torah portion is the idea of sanctity and purity in many different realms. And the beginning of the Torah portion speaks to us about a woman who gives birth. I would like to take a look at the screen with everyone. This is the beginning of the first verse is Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. Hashem tells Moses, saying, next verse in chapter 12, verse 2, Daber el bnei Yisrael lemor, tell the Jewish people, Isha ki tazria v'yalada zachar, a woman who conceives and then gives birth to a boy. V'tamea shivat yamim kimeni dat devota titma. She has 7 unclean days, just as the days of her menstrual flow, she will be considered impure. The next verse says, Ubayom hashmini yimol besaru lato. So she gives birth, 7 days of being unclean, and then she has the then she is to make sure that her son is going to be circumcised on the 8th day. So the commentaries ask, Reb Leib quotes this, what is the Torah mentioning and reminding us about right now about the obligation to circumcise the child? Even though the Torah does mention the scenario, yes, of a woman giving birth here to a boy, but this section is clearly explaining the details and the laws of the purification that the woman undergoes post-childbirth. So the question is, why over here, even though a baby boy is being mentioned, why mention about Brit Milah? Oh, mention you got to name him. Mention you got to feed him. Mention you got to do all other things. So why specifically? We're talking about a purification process over here. So we talk about what she does now. She gives birth. She's got to wait 7 days. And then we're going to learn that she has some more days to follow. But why in between is there the mention that this boy has to be circumcised? It seemingly has nothing to do with her purification process. She has 7 days and then another 33 days. So in those 40 days, but in the middle, in between that, circumcise the boy. Again, Reb Leib says, why is it necessary here to mention it? We already mentioned by Abraham the obligation to circumcise. Ever since Isaac, the Jewish people have an obligation to circumcise their boys on the 8th day. So why is it being mentioned here again? Okay, it's a very, very clear question. So Reb Leib answers it, and then he goes on to bring a very strong proof for his answer. So listen to his answer in short, and we will develop it. Sometimes there's different ways to answer different questions. Sometimes we develop it and then give the answer, or sometimes we give the answer and then we go back to develop it to appreciate the answer. I think the way Reb Leib did it, and I think in my opinion also, the clearest way to do this, to answer this question, is to just give you the quick answer, and then to develop it. So then when you see it again at the end, you're going to be like, wow. So watch this. Reb Leib says that in truth, the reason, the place that the Torah is mentioning circumcision, the Brit Milah here, is the perfect place. Obviously, as we know, there's no mistakes in the Torah at all. And he explains why. He says, the Brit Milah, in truth, is a thanksgiving offering. In Hebrew, it's called a korban todah. It's a thanksgiving offering, expressing one's gratitude to Hashem for the birth of a brand new healthy baby boy. When the Torah now is talking about what a mother must do in regards to all of the sacrifices she has to do as a process of her purification process, it also mentions, don't forget, part of the purification process, the very first korban, the first sacrifice offering that's going to be brought, is really going to be the circumcision of your son. So that's the answer in short. Now let's go back and develop it. It's a beautiful and it's a novel idea, and there's a lot of nice ramifications that come from this. Okay? So Reb Leib goes on to now prove that a circumcision is equivalent to a sacrifice, to a korban. He proves this from what the Satan told Hashem regarding the Akedat Yitzchak, regarding when he was convincing Hashem to test Abraham to to slaughter his own son. The Rashi is on the verse in Genesis, chapter 22, verse 1. The verse is as follows: Vahi achara devarim ha'ele, and it was after these passing of these things that God, Elokim Nisat Abraham, God tested Abraham and told him, and Hashem, and Abraham answers Hashem, I'm here. I am here. Here I am. Normally, whenever the Torah says, and it was after the passing of these things, we want to know what these devarim were, these things were. So Rashi goes and he gives two interpretations. The second interpretation is the one I'll bring first, because the first one is the one that we really want to hear, but I'll give you the second one first. Rashi's second interpretation is based on the Talmud, Masechet Sanhedrin, that after the words Ishmael said, and he came to pride himself over Yitzchak, Ishmael, Abraham's first son, came and he said, aha, I got a Brit Milah when I was 13 years old, and I didn't fight back. You were only 8 days. You couldn't object, you couldn't fight back, even if you tried to. Yitzchak says to Ishmael, you only came out with one organ that you had to sacrifice, so to say. If Hashem would ask me to give my whole life, sacrifice myself, I would. No problem. Based on that, the Satan comes to Abraham and comes to Hashem and says, let's go test him on it. Let's see if he'll hold up to his claim. But on topic, Rashi's first interpretation means a lot more to us. The Satan came and accused Abraham and told Hashem that Abraham made an entire banquet when Yitzchak was 2 years old. And he didn't even offer. He invited everyone, all the noblemen, all the royalty. Everyone was invited to this 2-year-old party for Yitzchak as a thanksgiving to Hashem. But with all of that, not even one ram or one goat was brought as a korban, as a sacrifice to you, Hashem. So the Satan is coming and telling Hashem, he's accusing, look at Abraham. You think he's so great? He didn't even bring one sacrifice to you for his son. He should have. This is what Rashi brings down. Reb Leib wants to strengthen the claim of the Satan before answering the question. Because he said it's a big issue. What type of answer did Hashem say? Hashem answered, if I would ask Abraham to do so, he would even sacrifice his entire son. And because of that, he goes on to testing Abraham with the 10th test of sacrificing Yitzchak. But Reb Leib says, what type of answer is if I would have asked him? How could Hashem answer Satan? If I would have asked Abraham to do so, he would have. But he didn't. At the end of the day, he didn't bring a korban. So Reb Leib says, I want to strengthen the claim, the accusation of the Satan. In our Torah, there are many sacrifices being brought. The very first sacrifice recorded in our Torah is in the 4th chapter of Genesis, and that is Cain and Hevel, Adam's 2 sons. Arguably, we can say they brought thanksgiving offerings. One brought from his animal, first brought from the fruit of the land, the other brought from his animals. It was thanksgiving korbanot, offerings. The next to bring sacrifices in our Torah, recorded in our Torah, was Noah. Noah, after he became aware of him, he knew that he and his family was saved from the great flood. Take a look at your screen. chapter 8, verse 20, Vayiven Noach mizbeach l'Hashem, and Noach builds an altar for God. Vayikach mikol ha'behemah tehora mikol ha'of ha'tahor vayal olot b'mizbeach, and he brings burnt offerings on the altar. So there's Noach. In truth, Reb Leib says, and he brings different proofs and sources, that Adam himself also brought, he quotes the Malbim, another Torah commentary, that Adam himself brought a thanksgiving offering to God after seeing the kindness of God through the creation of the world. So Adam brought korbanot, his children Cain and Hevel, Noach brought korbanot, but it gets stronger. Avraham himself was not shy to bring sacrifices. Avraham himself had a tradition. He kept with this tradition that he got from Adam and his children and Noach, that he went along to build altars and to bring sacrifices. When he was promised the land of Israel and that he would have children. Take a look at your screen. Genesis, chapter 12, verse 7. Vayira Hashem el Avram, and the Lord appeared to Abraham. Vayomer lezaracha et haaretz hazot, to your children you'll have this land. Vayiven sham mizbeach l'Hashem nirei elav. Right then and there, he built an altar to bring a sacrifice to God. When he was told that he'd have children, he told that this land would be his. Okay. Next says Reb Leib, Abraham returns from Egypt safely. Him, his wealth, most importantly, his wife Sarah. What does he do? Chapter 13, verse 14. Ela makom, where does he get to? Verse 4, I mean. Ela makom hamizbech asher asa sham berishona. He goes back to where he made the first altar. Like Hashem Avram b'shem Hashem, he brings another altar. He brings another korban over there. Doesn't stop there. When Avraham gets to Hebron, he arrives to the city of Hebron, and he again is promised that his descendants will inherit the land of Israel. What does he do? Take a look. Take a wild guess what he does. Vayehal Avram vayavo vayeshev belonem mamre. I'm in chapter 13, verse 18. Vayiven sham mizbeach l'Hashem, and he again builds another altar for Hashem, and he brings a korban, he brings a sacrifice. One last time, Avraham brings another thanksgiving offering at the last moment when he's told not to sacrifice Isaac by the Akedat Yitzchak. Instead, what does he do? He swaps Isaac for a ram, and he places it there as a thanks for the rebirth. Reb Leib says as a rebirth or a second birth of Isaac, because Isaac was practically almost dead. He was tied up and he was about to be slaughtered. Reb Leib learns this from the way Rashi interprets the verse. I'll do this quick because it's a little intricate, to be honest, but take a look at this verse, chapter 22, verse 13. Abraham lifts his eyes and he sees a ram that has its horns stuck in the trees. Vayelech Avram vayikach et ha'ayil. He goes and he takes his ram, vayaleu leolah tachat beno, and he brings it up instead as a burnt offering instead of his son. Reb Leib takes a look. It quotes to us Rashi that it's redundant. Vayaleu leolah means that he brought it up as its burnt offering. Tachat beno, instead of his son. We know it's instead of his son. Why do we need to say instead of his son also? These two words, if you're looking at the screen, should be deleted. Why are they there? So Rashi answers that the reason why they're there is because every action that Avraham Avinu was doing, Tachat Beno teaches us that he was doing it, and he was saying that everything he's doing really should have been done to his son. The tying of the ram should have really been done to Isaac. The drawing of the knife, the slaughtering of the slaughtering of him, the sprinkling of the blood. All of this should have been really done to his son, and he was having in mind that he was doing it to his son, even though Hashem said not to after. Reb Leib says we see from this Rashi that the action of bringing up the ram in and of itself is a separate intention from the afterward intentions of as if it's Isaac, meaning the vayaleu leolah that Hashem that Abraham brings the animal up as a burnt offering. That in and of itself was the korban todah, was the thanksgiving offering. Again, based on this, he brought multiple proofs. I think there's 8 proofs he listed. Based on this, Abraham was a person who always for no, I mean, he did not ever hold back from bringing sacrifices. He found any excuse to in a good way. So the Satan is coming and he's accusing Avraham to Hashem. Why didn't he bring a sacrifice for the birth of his son at age 100? It's a good question, right? If Avraham Avinu is one to not hold back from bringing sacrifices of expressing his gratitude to God, so why didn't he bring a sacrifice when Yitzhak was born to thank him? He wasn't 20 or 30 or 40 when he had his son. He was 100 years old. His wife was 90. Where's the sacrifice to thank Hashem? Asks the Satan. The answer is at the end of Parashat Lech Lecha, when Avraham was commanded, Reb Leib says, to circumcise himself, Hashem promised him that he and his wife Sarah will have a son and you will name him Isaac, Yitzhak. And there will be a covenant with him. Take a look. This is a fascinating answer. Genesis chapter 17, verse 19. Vayomer Elokim, God tells Abraham, Aval Sarai Shtecha, your wife Sarah is going to give birth to a boy and you're going to call him Yitzhak. And then Zva'akimoti Briti Ito, and I'm going to establish my covenant. Look what it says, with him, an everlasting covenant with his seed after him. From here, our commentaries learn that the obligation of circumcision, Rashi learns, the obligation of circumcision was specifically for Yitzhak and his descendants, not Ishmael and not anyone else. Was it a nice thing for them to do? Maybe. But did they have an obligation the way we have it? No, it's not. They don't have a covenant. They don't have a brit. Reb Leib says, you know what Avraham Avinu understood? He said from the way Hashem commanded him to do the circumcision and to transmit it over to his son Isaac, he felt that to sanctify one's body and to commit oneself to Hashem can only be done through the Brit Milah. And this sanctification is an action that is exactly like bringing a korban. The whole point of the korban is to commit oneself to Hashem, to sanctify yourself to come closer to Hashem. And just as there's the blood of a sacrifice, there's the blood of the Brit Milah. And the same way that there needs to be spilling of the blood of the sacrifice, the blood of the Brit Milah has to spill also. That's why there's certain ways that we're not allowed to, certain techniques we're not allowed to use to circumcise a baby, because there has to be blood. Now, God forbid the kid doesn't need to bleed to death, but there has to be blood. Because of this, Abraham says to himself that he is sure that the drawing of the blood that he did to Yitzhak when he was 8 days old at his Brit Milah, he fulfilled his obligation of bringing a korban todah. He fulfilled his obligation of bringing that sacrifice. So this was Reb Leib's idea, his novel idea, and then he found the proof for this answer. Because it's a big thing to say that Brit Milah equals sacrifice. Like, let's face it, a Brit Milah is a quick snip, takes 30, 40 seconds, a minute at the most. Sacrifice is a real ordeal over here. You're killing an animal, you're sacrificing it, you got to bring it to the Beit HaMikdash, it's got to be on the altar, it's got to be burnt. There's a lot more to be done, so to say, with the sacrifice than a circumcision. So again, it's a novel idea to say that they both equal the same thing. So he finds a proof. He finds two proofs. First proof is found in the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch, by the laws of Brit Milah, says that the father of the baby has to stand right next to the mohel, the circumciser, in order to let him know that he's doing it on his behalf. Again, the obligation is the father should do it himself. If he can't do it, he has someone do it on their behalf, like a shaliach, a messenger. The Gaon Mivilna says on that Shulchan Aruch, he quotes the Midrash that discusses the prohibition of bringing a korban, an animal, sacrifice within 7 days of it being born. I'll quote to you a paraphrased midrash in English, that the idea of it is that the law of a man is the same as that of an animal. That just as a man does a Brit Milah on the 8th day, an animal can only be sacrificed from the 8th day. This is all the Gra says. Now, what does that have to do with anything? Reb Leib says, like anyone who's learned Shulchan Aruch understands, the Gra throws in these bombs and you don't understand, what does he mean by that? Like, super short. What did he mean by that? Reb Leib says, you know what he was doing? He was connecting Brit Milah to Korban, a circumcision to a sacrifice, that they are the same. That just as one can't be done before 8 days, so can't the other be done before 8 days. He's coming to connect it to the two. And just as that a person that brings a sacrifice has to be standing there alongside the slaughtering and the entire process of the korban, of the sacrifice, so too does a father have to be standing there right next to the mohel during the circumcision. Because the circumcision, the Brit Milah, is a form of korban. It's a form of a sacrifice. He brings another proof from the Zohar. Beautiful proof. The Zohar tells us clearly that anyone who offers their son as a sacrifice, and it obviously does not mean to kill them, chas v'shalom, it means in the Brit Milah, that's the context of the Zohar, is considered to have brought all types of sacrifices in front of God. All of them. And it's as if they built an altar for God. So the Zohar continues and says, therefore, a vessel should be prepared with a little bit of earth in it, kind of like an altar, where the foreskin, the orla, should be placed into it as a korban. Again, another proof that Brit Milah is akin to, similar to, a sacrifice. This was, now let's go back and answer our original question. Here's the punchline. This was God's answer to the Satan. Not only would Abraham be ready to bring a korban todah, thanksgiving offering, he would also be ready to sacrifice his son entirely. The proof is that he already spilled his blood at his Brit Milah. And that was a form of korban todah, a form of a sacrifice. So Hashem says, I'm certain that if we would ask Abraham to sacrifice his son, he would pass the test. So the Satan says, I'll take you up on it. Let's test him. And then that was exactly the whole Akedat Yitzchak. Reb Leib now ties it back to our Torah portion. He says, you know why the Torah is telling us about a Brit Milah on the 8th day in our Torah portion? So the woman gives birth. Then she has to finish her entire 40 days, another 33 days, until she could bring her sacrifice, and she's fully cleansed. In between that, the Torah commands the Brit Milah, because the Brit Milah is the beginning of the chain of korbanot, of sacrifices that she's going to bring, because it in itself is a sacrifice. So the lesson from here, and it's a fascinating story. Sorry, and then I have a story to share about Reb Leib, but it's a fascinating lesson. The lesson is that every parent has to realize the great merit they have when they're able to fulfill the mitzvah of circumcising their son. That we are having the opportunity in our day and age, even though the Bet HaMikdash is not built yet, and that we're yearning for it for thousands of years. But when we sacrifice our son, it's like we're building a mizbeach, an altar, and we are bringing a sacrifice. Now, of course, the baby lives and bees well for its entire life, of course. But we spill the blood and we do a sacrifice right then and there to thank Hashem for the great merit and reward of having this gift. Also, the parents should have the intention in their mind that that they are fulfilling a sacrifice when they're doing this great mitzvah. I think it's a fascinating concept. It's an important lesson. So there's two things I want to say. One thing I want to say is that Rabbi Israel Meir, the son-in-law of Reb Leib, told me, I told him, no, give me a good story about Brit Milah from the Rav. Tell me something. So he said, I have to think about it. He got back to me. He said that to his family members, he would give a small silver becher, it's called, a small silver kiddush cup for every boy that was born. And he used to have inscribed on it, Yeled Tov. He did this only for his close family members and very, very close students. Because Rabbi Yisrael Meir thought that he was the only one who got them for his children. But then he found out that a distant family member and a student of the Rav also received as a gift. Now, I'm sure he went to thousands of Brit Milot, and he was definitely Sandak multiple times. So he obviously didn't give a silver cup to every single Brit Milah he was invited to. But a very nice thing, an interesting thing, that every close family member and close students received from Reb Leib a silver cup that had inscribed on it, "Good boy, Yeled Tov," and I guess it was a form of blessing. And he said it was a small one that he uses for Friday night after Kiddush. When you give the wine to everyone, every kid had their own little silver cup. So that was a beautiful, nice story from Reb Leib. One other thing I want to mention is that the sandak is a very, very honorable and special merit and reward. And to the point where the sandak himself turns into, that's the person holding the baby during the circumcision, they transform themselves into an altar. So it's one thing to do a sacrifice, but what if you are the altar that the sacrifice is being brought upon? And there's a very, very tremendous mitzvah, reward, and merit to be a sandak, and all of your good intentions and good traits are passed on to the child. Furthermore, there is a midrash that says there's a great segula for wealth and prosperity when one is the sandak for a baby, whether it's your family member or not, it doesn't matter. So it's something that if you're asked or called upon to do, you should run to do it with great enthusiasm. There are people who go up to parents that have baby boy and tell them, I'll pay for the entire Brit Milah ceremony and brunch and lunch and the whole event just so I could sit to be the sandak. I've done some Brit Milot like that there were people who maybe couldn't afford, and there was someone who was able to afford, and they paid for the entire Brit Milah just so they could sit and be the sandak, which is a great merit. So it's something that we should try to take. We don't only do it for the fringe benefit of wealth and that prosperity blessing, but mainly to be there, part of the sacrifice, turn yourself into the altar itself, is something which is absolutely fascinating. So again, tonight's theme between the Zer Shimshon and Reb Leib is the theme of Brit Milah, the theme of forging that covenant with God at a young age, and at 8 days old. From the Zer Shimshon, we saw the idea of the finishing of creation, the conversation between Turnus Rufus and Rabbi Akiva. And from Reb Leib, we see this amazing concept that circumcision is a sacrifice. It's like a sacrifice. And that's why Abraham didn't bring one when Yitzchak was born, because another sacrifice, because the Brit Milah, the circumcision, was a sacrifice. And that's why it's mentioned here in the beginning of our Torah portion, because that's the beginning of the chain of sacrifices that a mother brings after she gives birth to a baby boy. I would like to thank everyone for joining us. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask. Okay. Eileen has a question. Go.
First of all, that was very beautiful. Very, very, very. And I'm gonna apologize for my question, I think, because I think it's very, very, very I don't know. It's elementary, I think.
Don't worry, there's no bad question.
I still want to know. All right. So, okay, learning more with you, I can understand that this is a korban, a sacrifice. But I always thought it was a bond between you and Hashem.
For the baby, it's a bond between the baby and Hashem, but for the parents, it's a sacrifice.
That's what I wanted to understand was, so if it's a bond between you and Hashem, I think that's a merit. Of course, it's a huge merit. It's an unexplainable merit. So who gets that merit? You, the baby?
Both.
The child. So you're sharing the same exact merit? In other words?
Well, in one hand, you could say they're sharing the same merit. In another hand, you'll say, well, when that child grows up, he'll have the opportunity to be the one sacrificing with his own children.
Okay. All right. God willing. Yes, of course. Of course. That's what we want. From one generation to another generation. I was just kind of curious because I always thought the bris really was always between the baby and God, and that's what.
So that's good. The problem with that is the baby's 8 days old. The baby doesn't understand, right? Who's really benefiting from it? He benefits from it when he gets older. That he doesn't have to suffer when he's 13 to be cut up, right?
Right. Well, that's what I was asking. Who benefits that merit?
It's real. It's both. It's a combination. But the truth is, it's the parents. I mean, even myself. You know, when you have your first boy, and especially if it's your first child. It's a little flustering to feel to put them under a knife right away.
Gotta make sure you have a good male. Do you know one?
We know one. We know one around town.
He's a male. He could do anything. Okay. Yes. All right, go ahead. I'm sorry.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, we have La Bandita Yasminita. We can't hear you.
Can't hear you. You have to.
It's la bandida. You pronounce it la bandida, but that's fine. Thank you, Rabbi. Good evening. So my question is this: it might sound silly or not, but does it really make a difference how the bris is done? You know, between the straw and not? Because I mean, I've been very traumatized with that. Like, me and my husband were fighting literally when my son was born because I'm like, no, it needs to be a straw. And he told me it's not a kosher breast with a. So, I mean, I felt bullied into it. And the Moel did not use the straw. And until today, I still think about it. So I'm just curious, what is the big deal? Is he right? Is he just a little nutty? And that's it. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, very good question. Very fair question. I will try to answer it as quick as possible because it could obviously be dragged out. First, let's explain to our viewers what we're talking about and why it's such a contentious issue. What we're talking about is there's certain steps that takes place for a circumcision. Step number 1 is cleaning the baby. Step number 2 is separating the foreskin from the brit with a thin tool, kind of like a thin like metal pencil that goes in and separates the foreskin from the brit itself. Then a guard is wedged on to know exactly where to cut and to keep it safe. Then it's sliced. Then it's ripped and peeled back down. After that, the Talmud says that the blood has to be drawn out from the inner crevices of the cut. And therefore, the Talmud says the way to do that is to suck out the blood from the inner crevices with one's mouth, which is the greatest way to suck anything up. Okay? So for thousands of years, that's the way it was always done, to the point where the Talmud says any mohel that does not do so has to be banned from circumcising. So that's severe. Now, wine should be placed in the mohel's mouth first, because for taste, obviously, none of it is swallowed. It would be spit out. And also for sanitary reasons, right? Wine, it's an alcohol. Having said that, it has become very contentious over the past 100 years, 150 years even, this whole idea. Some people are very uncomfortable with it. So the way to get around it, not to get around it, to fulfill it still, is by using a glass tube that has a gauze in it in order that there is no, it serves as a barrier between the moil and the baby, and it's for both of their protections. It's the protection of the moil just in case the baby is carrying something in his blood from his parents, and the protection for the baby just in case the moil is carrying something from himself or picked up from someone else. So no saliva blood contact at all. And you still put it on top of the bris, and that suction, that putting it on like a suction cup and then drawing up allows for the blood to still come out of the deeper inner crevices, which is a medical thing that the Talmud actually requires us to do. Having said that, those are the two ways to do it: either directly with one's mouth with no separation, or with a glass tube as a separation. Halacha lemaaseh, it is permitted to use a glass tube. It is 100% permitted. Is there reason to find a way to not use it? Yes, the most ideal way would be to not use it. But then you have to be comfortable with it, and you also have to find a mall that is comfortable with it. I do them both ways. If people don't ask, I just use a tube. If people ask for a tube, I do use a tube. If someone would ask me to not use a tube, I've done it, and I would not use a tube. Primarily on people that I know, whether it's close family or close people that I know that I could trust them, that God forbid they're not carrying any type of disease in their blood that would endanger me or my family. But that's the breakdown of I'm trying to give you the most educated answer to your question, the most well-rounded answer to your question. Did I answer? Yeah, good. Okay. Any other questions? Eileen has a follow-up question for sure, even though we've had this conversation before.
I don't, actually. I think you gave a great answer now that I've learned.
Now that we've spoken about it before, you lived through it, and now it's
out. Yes, and I'm not even a boy. Hi.
It was very well explained.
It's a very difficult. I mean, I did do a lot of learning on this subject to some degree, and it is an extremely sensitive subject and a very deep and serious subject, and it's very controversial.
Yeah, but when you use the straw,
explained it so elevated and so perfectly, and it went so well in with Reb Leib's lesson that it was just very beautiful. So I have no questions, which that in itself is very beautiful.
Amazing. Kol hakavod, Rabbi Laredo. I just wanted to say.
Did you hear what Ron said?
Well,
say?
You cut right to the point.
Oh, lots of pun intended
pun.
there.
That's it. It's Ron 6.0 now.
That's right.
You just turned 60, Mom.
I know. I sent a beautiful message.
Yes, she did. She was part of the
from the heart.
Yeah.
From the heart.
Beautiful. Very.
He deserves it.
It was much better than your son's.
Oh, good. And we didn't collaborate. Imagine that.
Ron, you were lucky you even got one from us. I just got back from the emergency room with Moshe when I did that.
What was wrong with Moshe?
He got a concussion on Sunday.
Yes. My whole family knows, obviously, but me.
Yeah, because I was trying not to communicate with you so you wouldn't pick up on what we were doing.
No one wanted to bother you. It's
Okay.
all good.